Hey everyone, welcome to Reasonably Ad Lib. This is Explore Series number 1. I know this is not summer special time anymore, but we got some feedback from some of our listeners. They actually like the occasional interviews and discussions sprinkled into our regular topics. So from time to time, we're going to have one of these again, and hopefully you enjoyed it. Today we have jazz pianist Tom Shouk in the studio. He's going to talk a little bit to us about jazz and classical music and some of the pedagogical issues surrounding teaching jazz and classical. He's also a classical clarinetist. Again, if you like our show, please let your friends and family know about us. You can find us on Facebook. Just search for Reasonably Ad Lib, or go to www.facebook.com/reasonably ad lib, and you can always send us a message at ralpodcast@gmail.com. That is ralpodcast@gmail.com. Okay, I'm going to we're going to dive right into a discussion session with Tom Shouk. Talk to you later. Hey everyone, welcome back to Reasonably Ad Lib. This is a special segment. We have, a lot of times we on this show we talk about different kinds of music. I know the main theme or the main thing for the show is classical music, but music, you can't contain it. You can't just put it in a box and says this is classical music and we're not going to talk about anything else. So on previous edition of the show, we talked to jazz musicians about some of the interconnection between different genres of music. And today we have a jazz pianist here at the studio. His name is Tom Shouk, and he's a jazz pianist. And he's also a classical clarinetist.
Mm-hmm.
Is that right? So I'm sure he can offer a lot of insights in terms of this interconnection between classical music and jazz music. Hey, how you doing, man?
Doing great, thank you.
So now you're the lecturer of music at Whitworth University.
Yes,
right?
yes. I teach jazz piano, direct some jazz combos, and teach a lot of music theory.
Right. Can you tell us a little bit about your background or where you're from? Or
sure.
Yeah.
Actually, I'm originally from Spokane.
Yay.
So I'm sort of the local product here. And my mother was a piano teacher.
Right.
So all three of my siblings and I, we had to start piano at an early age. So we got that going, and eventually I got into jazz. So I played jazz piano and classical piano, equally, studied them equally all the way through high school.
Yeah.
When I came to college, my freshman year, it's almost like triple majoring in jazz piano, classical piano, and classical clarinet.
Wow.
And after about a semester of that, it's like I need to make some decisions here because I can't practice that much.
No, if you can only do that if you have like 27 hours a day.
Yes,
and then you only sleep for one.
Mm-hmm.
So
my what ended up happening is I thought, I need to make a practical decision here. How am I going to make money as a musician? And the least likely route for me was making money would be as a pianist,
Right.
a classical pianist, unless I wanted to devote my entire life to that.
Right, and then do the route, get a master, and then hop
Yep.
over to a DMA, and then try to get an academic degree.
Right. And I think by that time I had discovered that I wasn't as into playing classical piano as I was playing jazz. So at that point I said, well, clarinet, I can get a symphony job. Jazz piano, I can freelance and play
Right.
gigs. So
Right.
those are sort of the two tracks that I continue to follow.
Right. I think one of the differences between being a classical pianist and a jazz pianist is, I think there's maybe a. Tell me if I'm wrong on this, but there is a limited amount of venues you can play as a classical pianist, right?
Yes.
You can play concert hall, you can teach.
Yes.
You can. I don't think anybody actually want to hear a Beethoven sonata
Right.
in a club at 1 a.m. It's like
Yes.
no. But for jazz musician, you can totally do. It's a lot. There are a lot more. It's freer
Yes.
in terms of
Yes,
where
absolutely.
you can perform and how you can perform it in places. Now, yeah. So when you were a kid, right? Do you have problem making yourself practice, or are you one of those guys who just go for it?
Actually, a little of both. I always wanted to be outside, playing football or something, rather than inside practicing.
Yes.
My mom was the taskmaster on the piano. But
Right.
when I started to really learn playing scales, this is like the story I tell all of my students to say I'm atypical. I thought that was the coolest thing ever because
Wait, what?
I could go autopilot. I'm just going to play through all these scale and arpeggio exercises, and I'm not really even working anymore because I've learned them by rote.
Wow.
So I'm going to fool my piano teacher, my mother, who's listening upstairs. I'm just going to play these scales for like half hour, 45 minutes, and that
Wow.
takes up most of my practice time.
Wow. So you actually like doing scales?
So I really enjoyed it.
Wow. So
Almost therapeutic.
I teach a little bit of piano, just beginning piano, and just like having kids do the fingering exercises
Yes.
and scales, just the toughest thing.
Yes.
And then I actually have occasions with parents coming to me and says, "Can you not have my kid play all that boring stuff?" I'm
Yep.
like, man, the fundamentals.
Yes.
Now, when you at some point you choose between being primarily, I'm sure you can swing between the
Sure.
two, right?
Yes.
But there is at some point you are you kind of pick your path and whether you want to become a primarily a jazz pianist and a classical pianist. Other than the factor that that being a jazz pianist has a little bit more opportunity to play. Are there other factors? I mean, is jazz? Do you think jazz is more? You can be more expressive with certain emotions and.
In certain ways, I do think, as a classical musician,
Right.
especially on the piano and other mediums where you have a really large repertoire,
Right.
There's plenty of room for expression. I think the thing about jazz for me is that the expression is very immediate.
Right.
This is how I'm feeling right now. No matter what tune I'm playing, most of the time, it's not like, oh, I should go play this Beethoven sonata because this is the way I'm feeling. But with jazz, like I can play this tune one day, and if I'm ticked off at someone, it'll sound very angular.
Right,
the next day, if I'm mellow, it might be a slower tempo, and so the immediacy of the expression, I think, was key for me.
Yeah, a lot of times, which when you say that, you reminded me. A lot of times when you go see a jazz presentation,
Sure.
I don't want to say a jazz concert
Sure,
because
yeah.
that's kind of an oxymoron, a jazz concert. But a jazz presentation, go to a club. When they play the tune,
Yes.
the exposition is the tune itself.
Yes.
You don't have to dance around for a minute and a half before you go into the exposition.
Right, right.
And the other thing too is, in classical music there are occasions like the Mendelssohn violin concerto. We just jump into the melody,
Right, sure,
the main theme right away. But a lot of times, like a Mozart or Beethoven sonata, it really needs maybe a minute and a half or the first 40 measures to really heat up and really you really need a little bit of time to figure out what the message is.
Yes,
a little bit of time. But for jazz, it's you just jump right in.
Right.
The drum set would go and then bam, you go right into the thing.
Yes, and even when you're playing what I call a pickup session or a jam session with people you haven't played with a lot, you call a tune, and as a pianist, you're usually tasked with giving an introduction. Right. But the introduction, your thought is, how do I want the tune to sound? Because as soon as I start playing the introduction, I want that to be in that mood, in that groove. So even when you're introducing a tune, you're trying to hop in right away to the feeling.
Right. So the mode of expressing yourself is really one of the things that draw you into jazz. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Now, a lot of times when we talk about jazz piano and classical piano, a lot of times we think of that and we tend to think that it's totally two different things. Is it really two totally different things, or there are connections between the two? What I'm driving at really is when you look at old footage of the great jazz pianists, the Duke Ellingtons, the Count Basie, and even Thelonious Monk, and even maybe the quieter ones, Horace Silver.
Sure.
What was that? Who's that guy that played in the Miles Davis kind of blue?
Bill Evans?
Yeah, Bill Evans. He looked like an accountant. Right?
Yeah.
So even now the approach to the keyboard itself, how they hit the note, how they sit down and just totally different from when you look at Horowitz, or Paulini, or a classical pianist, right? Now, is there really such a difference, or just a style thing, or?
I think it actually has to do more with technology, in a sense, which is like that's coming from left field. If you think back, 75 years, how many mixing boards were there at venues and microphones? It's not happening. So as a pianist in a jazz group, which typically has drums, bass, a couple horns, maybe a singer. In order to be heard, you just really have to play hard. And so I think some of that, not all of that, some of the hard, harsh playing is just circumstances of being a quieter instrument in a loud group.
Right.
But some of the players you mentioned, both Horace Silver, Thelonious Monk, were very percussive players,
right,
and that was part of their style. And some would look and say it's a lack of technique. Some would look and say no, they're totally in control. They could play anything they wanted. But I'm kind of in the middle.
Right.
When I look at Thelonious Monk play, I tell all my students, don't look like that. That's ugly. You can sound like that because the product is cool, but there are better technical ways to get that sound.
Right. Like Cecil Taylor.
Yes.
Oh my God! It's like he really just, and you're right. I mean, he really does approach the piano like it is a percussion instrument, which I'm sure we're gonna get some hate mails like percussion is like, hey, what do you mean? But I think. People know what we mean by, they really approach and hit the piano like it's a percussion instrument.
Right.
Yeah. So are they trying to achieve a certain sound? That sort of thing?
Yeah, absolutely. Jazz is very rhythmic.
Right.
And so it almost lends itself to all the instruments almost being percussive.
Right.
If you, especially in the early days, so to speak, way back when, you listen to trumpet player tone, saxophone tone. It is not what today we consider refined.
Right.
Now today's jazz musician though wants to be able to play that way.
Right.
Wants to have that flexibility of sound so that they can express in that way.
Right.
But I think currently a modern jazz musician tries to gain complete control technically, over his or her instrument, whether it be piano or anything else. And so I think that includes studying, I don't want to say studying classical music necessarily, but it includes the same techniques. You still have to play the piano,
Right.
you know. And if you need to go to Horowitz to learn and listen to that sound and the tone that he gets, that's what we as a jazz musician, that's what we do.
Right, right. So the fundamentals, it's the same.
Yes.
Is that what you say?
Yes.
So if a young student who has maybe 3 or 4 years of basic piano training comes to you and says, "Well, I want to be a jazz pianist now." But chances are you're not going to just show him Cecil Taylor videos. Just do that.
Right.
You know, there's still fundamentals.
Yes.
Yeah.
Basically, at that point, you teach them jazz theory mostly,
Right.
and continue to develop piano skills.
Can you explain a little bit what jazz theories are?
Yeah, in the sense that as a jazz player, your main mode of expression is going to be improvisation.
Right.
And just like anybody who wants to compose goes and studies how did they put this together? What kind of harmony led to this sound? Right. Jazz players have to study melody and harmony and learn how to create certain sounds. And when you're improvising, it's basically composing, but I call it composing without an eraser. Right. you can't go back and change what you just did.
Yeah, that's it's out there. It's already out there.
Yes. But so in order to sound like you're in the jazz idiom, you have to learn the harmony and melodic concepts behind that idiom.
Right. Yeah, that's why when there's an interview with Allen Ginsberg, who's a beat poet.
Yes.
He was, way back in, I guess, the late 50s and 60s, like at the time, right? They have this thing about, they try to, with beat poetry and jazz. And then there was an interview with Allen Ginsberg. He says, what's freer than jazz? And in a way, I don't think that is true, because there are certain, it is as free as it is in relative to other musical art form, other in compared to some of the classical, say, sonatas, right? There's still kind of a construct.
Yes,
and there are things within that construct that will work, and there are things that once you get out of that construct, it's like, this is going to sound this doesn't work
exactly.
And I think it's. Jazz is actually a really, to me at least, it's a really complicated art form because a lot of classical music, you're talking about 1-4-5-1, and then they're going to spice it up with the German 6 and
right,
the French 6.
Yeah.
But in jazz, you get into the 9th, the 11th, the 13th, and then all the dissonances in the middle of your basic 1-4-5-1, and then each of those little things has some kind of nuances to push the music to a different direction.
Exactly.
Right now, am I right to say that the amount of freedom is it's elevated because jazz, the expectation is different. So if you play something a little bit out of whack, there is a better chance to push it back into somewhere that is more comfortable.
Absolutely. The saying is, if you hit a wrong note, you're really only a half step away from a right note in jazz.
True.
Or if you hit a wrong note, if you repeat it enough times, they'll believe you meant it. Right.
Because it's like in comparison to maybe 16th century counterpoint.
Sure.
If you suddenly have a parallel fifth here and there, it's like, wow, everybody's just jumped.
Plus, an educated musical audience knows what to expect in classical music. They've heard the piece before.
Right.
It's pretty easy to say, oh, wow, he didn't play that right. In jazz, an educated audience would probably have heard most pieces, unless they're originals, before, and would know sort of what to expect.
Right.
But would be listening for, how's he going to go off the beaten path to make this more interesting?
Right. Improvisation, I think, is if there's no one right answer here. If you have to ask this almost impossible question to answer, what's the difference between jazz and classical music? When there's like tons of, you can go into crazy territory. But I guess the bumper sticker answer is improvisation.
Yes.
Because in classical music, we seldom do any improvisation. Even improvisation is wrong. Because if you have graduate recital, you decided to shove maybe 12 measures between the expos and the
Yes.
and the development in the Mozart sonata. They're gonna fail you.
So you might get
Right?
the hook right there.
Right. It's like dang, bang. But improvisation is the key, right? In your opinion, is how, and this is going to get into what
Yes.
the next big topic we're going to talk about, as in jazz is a very inclusive art form,
Right.
at least to me. And when it's being inclusive, that means it's harder to, I don't know if I'm saying this right, but it's harder to judge it.
Right.
As
Yes.
in, something is right or wrong. And, in terms of music, really, there is no absolute right, absolute wrong.
Absolutely.
And it's just something work better than the other ones. So I guess my question, and I guess the theme of this segment really is, now you teach at a college.
Yes.
Right? So I'm always interested to know, jazz being such an inclusive art form, that is, there's no, there's so much gray area. I hope I can say that.
Oh yeah.
How do you actually fit that study of that art form into a very traditional academic setting? That is basically academic setting is a very structured thing.
Right. Yes.
When you get when you approach a degree, when you get a degree, basically is you're trying to get the approval, attained the approval
Yes.
of your superior.
Yeah. Yep.
Right? In order to wear that, wear the funny hat and the gown, right?
Yep.
But once you slap a structure on the thing, you exclude certain stuff, right?
Yes.
How do you fit something like jazz into a setting like that? And I know this is like this is a loaded question, right? This is a $12 million question.
And if you look at from school to school different programs that have graduate studies in jazz,
Right.
they'll list their requirements, and you can really see how they are attempting to fit that in, because you can't really put out a graduate degree, at least anymore, and say, well, we'll know it when you're done.
That's the scariest thing.
Yes.
I don't know what's done.
Yeah. But I think what ends up happening with jazz, in order to quantify, I guess, is you set sort of the acceptable standards. What you need to be able to do at least do this well,
Right.
and some of that has to do with going back to jazz theory, knowing, generally speaking, what scale you would focus on when a certain chord happens.
Right. The more tangible elements.
Yes. So even in improvising, you can listen for, wow, I can tell he knows what he's doing because the notes that he's playing make sense.
Right.
And I can, wait, that doesn't sound very good. It sounds like he's playing a different tune.
Right.
That's when you start to get into the gray area. Is he trying to do that, and for what purpose?
Yeah.
So basically, you have to set some ground rules to say you need to learn this, and you need to be able to play it this way. And so that's a little bit, as far as being a jazz musician, that's counter to what you
Right. It's a very judgmental thing, unfortunately.
Yes.
Well, in classical music, right, there is at the very least the standard, I guess, at the very least, is for classical stuff. You have to play exactly what's on the page.
Right.
That's rule number one. How many? That's kind of painful to talk about, but how many notes you miss? You can't miss too many notes, and you can suddenly just improvise a bunch of notes into. So that's the most basic baseline of a classical music presentation, right? For jazz, though, because it's more inclusive, as in, I guess I can use this word, it's a little bit freer in terms of the expression.
Sure. Yes.
That's the standard is really not as clear.
No.
As a classical degree, right?
Yeah, and you'll find style wise between saxophone player A and saxophone player B at the same institution getting the same degree, radically different approaches to jazz, to their art form.
Right.
And so basically you almost end up judging the legitimacy.
Right. Right.
In some ways, it's like as composers went through the 20th century,
Right.
and they are trying to find a new way of expressing music without relying on harmony or just
Right.
trying to find a new mode of expression. We had to we're still figuring out what of this do we consider legitimate, because there's some 20th century music that we go, that's really challenging. Maybe I can appreciate it, but it's I'm not sure I like that.
Some of the serialists.
Yeah, and some of the serialism is very cool. Right. And so give it a couple more 100 years, and we'll be able to look back and say, all right, this is sort of the good music from that time period.
Right.
In the academic setting with jazz, you sort of have to do that. You have to say you're developing your own style,
right?
Choosing your own notes, making your own acceptable tone,
right?
Is that within the realm of possibility?
Right.
Is basically what we have to ask.
So a lot of times you're judging on the approach of a student,
yes.
Whether he or she is maybe willing to create certain things that that is. I don't even know how to put it. Maybe the approach, the presentation is valid.
Yes,
because it's so tough because every word, the word we use, there's a very judgment on it.
Yes,
so it's
absolutely.
like, it's valid. That means there's something not valid, right?
Right.
Let me ask you this too. Now, for classical music, right? There are different periods, right? I mean, there are specialists who would do, know all the other stuff, but they specialize in medieval Renaissance
Absolutely.
stuff. Medieval, the Hildegard von Bingen. That's the thing.
Yes,
that's the person's thing. And there are people who specialize in classical period, romantic. They're serialists. I don't think there are a lot of those.
No.
Is there such a thing in jazz? Because jazz has like different periods, right? I mean, the early stuff, and then the so-called traditional, the original Dixieland jazz band stuff, and then after that you get the swing, and that would be fun if you just focus on swing, right? And then after that you got the bebop, the hard bop, and then the fusion.
Then you get crazy after that.
And then it's like, what's going on? Is there such a thing now? When somebody approach jazz degree, right? Do you guys tell them, well, you have to be very good at these two styles. You have to be okay, but you don't have to disregard the other one. No, there's no such thing.
No. But I think as the goal of a jazz musician should be to there's another judgmental word we have. The goal of the jazz musician often is to ultimately create his or her own unique style.
Right.
Because that's what attracts us to jazz in the first place, the expression.
Right.
And so as a student of jazz, you end up focusing on the swing period sometimes, or even a certain player within the swing period. And then, you're focusing on learning the bebop language.
Right.
But all of that is toward the goal of learning the overall jazz language as a whole. So
I
you
love
can
that word, jazz language.
Yeah, so you can pick and choose and say, okay, this is what I am.
Right. Because like you, what you want to do is learn all the languages, and then you digest it, and then play around it in your head, and then hopefully spit out something that is completely different.
Absolutely, yeah.
Right?
It's I say the pursuit of the jazz musician really is ultimate control, mastery over your instrument and over your ears.
Yeah.
In the sense that I can play with any tone and style and technique, and I can play anything that I hear either outside or in my inner ear.
Right.
And it can just come out. And that way, in the moment, you can really express anything.
And it's a very subjective thing too, because it's a piece of communication, non-verbal communication, and then we can't really quantify it into, once you play that 3-minute thing, is your audience going to get your message right away, or they're going to sit around? I mean, you can't really judge it like that either, right? So it's just so incredible to me. jazz is such a complex thing.
Sure.
Yes, the misunderstanding is free, and you just pick up your instrument and do whatever the hell you want. That's not quite it, you know.
No.
I mean, there's the talent factor, but after that, you have to work
Yes.
in order to make your message one more approachable for everybody and make it a legitimate piece of communication.
Yes,
like you're
yes.
talking about. You just can't play notes,
That's right.
you know.
That's right.
And going back a little bit now, improvisation.
Yes.
And then we sort of talk about, you know, the chords underneath chord. I mean, a good, I guess part of good improvisation is when certain buttons are pushed. The improviser, I guess one of the things you judge the improviser on is whether buttons are pushed correctly.
Yes.
You know, when you try to push a piece of music, when you try to push a moment to the next moment, and how effective is it for you to get there by
Right.
pushing, you know, some of the harmonies?
Sure,
Right?
yes.
Are there other factors you think that is involved here, or melodic development?
Yeah, so, some of it goes back to language. Jazz has always been, especially before the jazz education movement started,
Right.
has always been an oral tradition.
Right,
And
right,
so
right.
you learn all the different licks of Coltrane because
Right,
that's now part of the lexicon.
Right.
But I think that, let's go back to the question again.
The improvisation, whether good or bad.
Oh yes. So
It's really hard to think.
yeah. So some of it is are you playing within the language,
Right.
Or if you're changing the language enough, does it still make sense to the listener?
Right.
Um,
right.
But also, I think you have to. It's much like sitting through a undergraduate theory course,
Right.
and you have all these rules. You have to write 4-part harmony, and you can't have parallel fifths, and all the students bristle at this. Isn't this America? Can't I do what I want?
No.
And what I tell students is you have to learn how to make inoffensive music,
Right.
and then go outside of the boundaries on purpose,
Right.
for a certain effect. Same way, you have to learn in jazz how to improvise without having people going, "Oh, I want to leave."
Yeah. No, yeah.
Even though that doesn't necessarily yield interesting music all the time,
Right.
You end up with muzak jazz, but
Yeah.
but it's then when you're in control of, I can go outside and take the listener somewhere where they're not expecting,
Yeah.
but then come back in.
Yeah. I mean, it's one of these things that is so hard to talk about too, because I guess if you ask me, you know, good or bad improvisation, good improvisation, you can go back to it, you know, even as a recording.
Yes.
It's a recording that just the recording happens like the same every time.
Right,
Some of the Coltrane improvisation, even objectively, right? It's the same every time you play that thing.
Yes.
You don't play around with it. You know, you don't roll it faster or slower. But every time you go back to it, you hear something new in there, or you can put certain elements together. This 6 seconds kind of reflect the 6 seconds 2 minutes down the road. You know, some of the Sonny Rollins improvisation is so fresh every time you approach it, you listen to it. And some of the improvisation just scales.
Yes.
Just arpeggios, basically up and down. I'm not going to name any names. So I guess if you ask me, that would kind of be sort of the distinction between.
Yes. So it's not just the notes you're playing, or that it has a jazzy rhythm.
Right.
They're the same elements of music that you would look for if you're studying any classical composition: thematic development. How did he put a surprising chord in there?
Right.
Like, the German six. What happened? You can do the same thing in jazz. All of a sudden, you play this note that logically makes sense, but to the ear, it's a little bit startling.
Right.
Then you go, oh wow, that, and so you know that person, unless they're very lucky, was doing that on purpose.
Right.
And jazz musicians often practice thematic development.
Right.
They try to play some motif, and then as they're improvising, either use that motif again later or try to let that motif constantly evolve.
Right.
So it's like the exposition of a solo would be that motif, and then you get into the development section.
Right, right.
So basically, you're pretending to be Mozart or Beethoven with your original, statements.
Yeah, that universality, because if I can actually quantify it like this, the tune and the improvisation is theme and variation.
Yes,
right?
yes.
And then theme and variation, of course, it's all over classical music too.
Right,
right?
absolutely.
So, when you look at the last movement of a sonata, a lot of composers, Mozart, Beethoven, would throw a theme and variation, and it's just a slower process, but the underlying spirit is really the same. Right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So there's one question I really want to ask a jazz educator. I have discussions with friends, and they're now enemies. That I don't know where. I'm primarily a classical musician. So, but that's not the only thing that I care about. But one of the mental exercises that I do is I try to envision what the next step is for the art form itself. And even saying that though is so wrong, because in art form this thing is huge.
Yeah.
There are a lot of prongs, that tentacles that go over the place. But the traditional academic categorization is different time periods for classical music is medieval Renaissance stuff way back, Baroque, and then classical, blah 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 blah, and then Romantic, and then on. Between Baroque period and which is a funny thing to talk about, because the Baroque period and the classical period, the line, right? It's roughly at 1750.
Yeah.
It's 1750 is Bach, when Bach died.
They planned it very well.
So the joke is always like, okay, news flash, Bach dead, classical periods begin.
Yeah.
No, that wasn't really how it happened, but and those 40 to 50 years between the death of Bach and the next big thing comes in. Those 30 or 40 years, there are a lot of different styles.
Yes.
Just that, right now, because we have to somehow pigeonhole things, it becomes the classical period, when Mozart comes along and try to, because he's so good at it, I guess, they just, everything just gravitate towards his style. So I'm trying to think, so now, in classical music, we have a lot more stuff, right? After the Impressionist, and then after the avant-garde, the classical music, and then the computer music. And what is the next step for classical music? And what is the trend what is the equivalent? Is there going to be equivalent to from Baroque to classical? We go so far, so wide, and then somehow it got narrowed back into one thing. And even, thinking, I'm sorry, this is kind of a tangent, but I'm like, I'm just thinking out loud here. Even that is what we think happened.
Right.
Now, 200 years ago. Back then, I'm pretty sure it's like, what? But, even there's like Baroque is fall out of style. And nobody really is going to, other than high academics, nobody's doing Bach on the streets.
Yes.
Back then. But I don't think they, in their minds back then, they actually have this kind of distinction that's classical style now.
Yes.
So this little transition between that, if I'm thinking that, is there going to be such a transition now to go to the next thing for classical music? I don't know what it is, and I don't think that's ever going to happen.
Sure.
And I cannot envision what that thing is. Is there such a thing in jazz? Because, I'm going to stop talking and because it's like, just monologue. But you know what I'm saying, though?
Yes.
Because in jazz, even though we're talking about the period of time we're talking about is about 130, 150 years. And there's like the early stuff, and then even the early stuff in New Orleans is really a mix of everything.
Yes,
too, right?
yeah.
And then you somehow you drive into Dixieland style sometimes, and then you swing and the progression. You know,
Right.
If you're interested, go to Mr. Shoke's jazz history class.
That's right.
What is the next thing? Because it seems like even for something so approachable like Ken Burns Jazz,
Yes.
the 10-part series, he kind of go into the Miles Davis jazz rock fusion stuff, and then bang, just stop there.
Right.
And even
right.
like he spent like 5 minutes on that, and then you have a commentator saying it's like playing tennis with a net, you know, and then bang, we just stop there.
Yes.
What is the next thing? What do you think is the next thing, or is there going to be a next thing?
That I see it very similarly to you. I think jazz and classical music are sort of in the same place.
Right.
I think because jazz is a younger
Right.
art form, that the time period has been compressed.
Right.
Our style periods are 10 years, to 15 years maybe. So I think what we've approached now is at the beginning of the 20th century, we have composers trying to find the next thing.
Right.
I think we've taxed harmony to its limits. Let's go find something that will be expressive yet totally different.
Yeah.
And in jazz, we've come to the same place.
Right.
We have, the swing feel is great, and we have all the language now. But where do we go from here? How do we make the next thing?
Yeah.
Some of that has to be discovered by the historians,
Right.
In the future.
Right.
But at the same time, it's like there's a stage of experimentation right now,
Right.
but it's all experimentation with what's gone in the past.
Right.
It's basically it's very postmodern.
Right.
Let's instead of really creating new jazz, let's include some reggae. Let's go back and listen to the classical stuff and see how that influences our jazz. So really what we're doing now is mixing,
Right.
mixing things together without a recipe. And it's very difficult to see. We're going to put it in the oven.
Right.
What, is anything going to come out?
Right.
And has everything been done?
Yeah.
And I have a hard time as well envisioning anything really new
Because
coming out.
Fusion is definitely, I think, the general. If you have to just slap a label on, now.
Yes.
I think fusion is still the thing because even in classical music, we're trying to bring in, world music into the arena, which is a perfectly necessary thing to do.
Yes.
Because in previous edition of the show, I talked to a conductor from Colombia, and we are talking about, there are a lot of really good music happening there too.
Yes.
And the composers over there, because they grew up under a different tradition, then they go to school and learn this whole classical thing.
Right.
They are in their head, they are very naturally blend the two things together, and the product that comes out is a really interesting amalgam of what it's, what are the elements in their head.
Right.
Which is a wonderful thing. But even fusion is not really now the presentation may be new.
Sure, yes.
But the underneath ingredients is actually existing.
It's just the same stuff
Right.
Packaged
Right.
differently.
Right.
Yeah.
So now the pool is wider in terms of the fusion, the elements that we're going to draw.
Yes.
But it's wider. But we're still not going into any different, the elements, the periodic table.
Right.
It's
right.
the same
It's
thing.
The same thing. Yeah,
it's the
been
same
there.
stuff, just it put together differently, right? So I don't know if we're going to draw any conclusion today.
Yes.
But maybe we should start a movement out here in the Northwest.
Well, I think maybe what we're pointing to is that the Mayans had it right.
Oh,
Music, if music isn't going to progress anymore, we might as well cut the calendar off, and it's the end.
Yeah, this is gonna. Well, I hope that before the Mayan is right, I hope the Giants win another World Series. Right? We still have time for that. But it's really one of these really interesting things to ponder.
Yes.
Maybe we do. Maybe when we are like old, in 30 or 40 years,
Yes.
we look back and it's like. either, well, I hope not, but I hope in 30, 40 years the discussion would be, man, that's such a wonderful thing that happened.
Right.
20
yes.
years ago. I hope we're not still having the same discussion as in, well, is this fusion thing ever going to go away?
At the present, it just seems like
Yeah.
dilution.
Right.
It's like, is everything going to end up, because name the new style? I don't know. Is everything just going to end up kind of being the same?
Right. Yeah. Great. So, well, thanks again, Tom, for coming in and
absolutely.
and teach us a little bit about jazz, because underneath everything, I'm a classical musician.
Sure,
I don't
sure.
really, I don't. I'm horrible at well, tuba player. We don't get a lot of opportunities to do jazz.
That's right.
So, well, thanks again, and hopefully, hopefully you come back to one of our shows
I would
and
love
talk
to,
a little bit
yes.
more about jazz. Thank you very much again.
Not a problem.
Thanks.
Thank you.
It don't mean a thing if it ain't got that swing. Do-a, 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 do-a.
Hey, that is it for Reasonably Ad-Lib Explore Series Number 1, Episode 3.5. Check out Tom's band's webpage. They're at www.6footswing.com. That is www.6foot, F-O-O-T, swing, S-W-I-N-G.com. I'm going to post it on our blog page and also on our Facebook page. You can, again, find us on Facebook. Just search Reasonably Ad-Lib, or send us an email at ralpodcast@gmail.com. So, yeah, again, help us out by talking to your friends and family about us if you like our show. So until next time, thank you very much for listening. Talk to you again soon. Bye.